to the I Love Buffalo podcast. Part of the I Love Buffalo network with your host, Josh Catry.
Welcome, good neighbors, to the I Love Buffalo podcast. I'm your host, Josh Catry. If you're new here, a little bit about the podcast. We cover everything from Buffalo's news, business, sports, crime, politics, history, unsolved murders, corruption, jiu-jitsu, nature and the outdoors, entrepreneurship, and all things that champion this underdog city that we all love and the good people in it. Thanks so much for tuning in. Today on the podcast, a devastating fire downtown, an update on the Buffalo Public Schools allegations, Bandits inch closer to another title, a recap of the I Love Buffalo podcast so far, and did you know Buffalo is almost the U.S. capital? All this and more on this episode of the I Love Buffalo podcast.
That's what I'm here for. I come from downtown.
That right there was Buffalo's own Strictly Hip, playing Grace 2 in the Buffalo Outer Harbor with the Buffalo Philharmonic. Strictly Hip are not just a staple here in Buffalo, they are a staple in the North American tribute scene, performing to sold-out venues all over the place. Their commitment to honoring the Tragically Hip's legacy has earned them a lot of loyal followers in both the U.S. and Canada, all across North America, and of course right here at home. They've won the Buffalo Music Awards for Top Tribute Band, led by Jeremy Hoyle. I've worked with them many times over the years at both Pearl Street and Buffalo River Works. Last year, including, Thaw Fest, certain playoff games. Back in the day when the Sabres actually made the playoffs, we had Strictly Hip playing at Pearl Street quite often. And of course, at last year's rally on the river at Riverworks to have the pep rally for the Bills home game to kick off the season. And they were the headliner there, and it was awesome. We worked with Joe Marino from the Locked On Bills podcast for the rally on the river, and he's from North Carolina. I wasn't super familiar with the Tragically Hip, and so I sent him a bunch of songs to prep him for that. I said, it's kind of part of being a Buffalonian. You have to at least know who the Tragically Hip are. You don't have to like them, but you have to at least know who they are. But they're hard not to like. So many good songs, very poetic lyrics, and just so well executed by Jeremy Hoyle and the Strictly Hip there that it's really hard to tell them apart, actually. They do just such a great job of covering the Tragically Hip and paying tribute to them. It's really cool to see a national level tribute band evolve right here in Buffalo, New York. And their upcoming shows can be found on their website at www.thestrictlyhip.com. Check them out. In our first segment here, we're going to cover a 4-alarm fire that broke out on Thursday, May 1st at the Paul William Belts Law Office on 36 Church Street in downtown Buffalo. This is the heart of those historic, beautiful buildings that tourists often visit town just to see. There is just a slew of awesome buildings right there on Church Street and Franklin that have this very historical significance. As you know, I am one of the overseeing managers for Pearl Street Grill and Brewery, and many of the employees were messaging me that day because it's only a couple 100 feet away from that building, and the smoke was going up all over downtown, and they were recording it, and people were meeting in the streets and making sure that they were doing anything they could to make sure everyone was safe, offering like water inside and come inside and get out of the smoke and stay out of the cold and all that stuff for people that were evacuated from the buildings. So that was cool to see with all the buildings downtown, everyone kind of worked together, and we made it through without any injuries. That's the most important thing. Even though these buildings are old and beautiful and historic, it's sad to see them get damaged or even ruined. It's worth just one life. Like just one life is worth a whole building easily. So it doesn't really matter. What matters most is that no one was injured and that everyone was safe. We all know some of the recent tragic stories about the firefighters that had lost their lives in the last few years. And we don't want to see anything like that. Safety is first. That's what the fire department is there to do. Always risking themselves, making themselves vulnerable for others, for each of us. And that kind of dedication and sacrifice should be honored. We honor it here for sure. Anyone who does that kind of sacrifice or vulnerability for their communities should absolutely be honored. So kudos to you guys for coming in, no one getting injured, taking control of the building, especially getting all the patrons out. And so thank you very much for your service. It's much appreciated. The fire started around 12:30 p.m., originating from an electric stove that was accidentally left on in the second floor break room. And so that electric stove turned into a giant fire that took down a building all the way downtown. Over 100 firefighters responded and fought the flames for nearly 4 hours. The building was constructed in the 1960s, had no sprinkler system when it was constructed, making the conditions very dangerous. Firefighters encountered pre-backdraft conditions, forcing them to retreat and fight the fire from the outside. And this was great that they were able to recognize that danger and then push everyone back outside once they realized all of the people were accounted for and had escaped the building. They didn't risk anything further, especially their own lives, once they realized there was no civilians still in the building. So kudos to the whole emergency crews and everyone that responded to that fire and handled it just absolutely the best you could. It was a smaller building trapped between bigger buildings, hard to reach, hard to navigate, and they did an outstanding job making sure everyone was safe. The fact that there's no sprinkler system is kind of weird to me a little bit because Pearl Street was built in the 1830s. Of course, didn't have sprinkler systems, and we had to retrofit it. They made us retrofit all that stuff into it. So I don't know why that didn't happen there. Maybe that wasn't possible. It just seems kind of weird that it wasn't made to happen, especially having a multi-floor building downtown. I thought it was like a rule that you had to have sprinklers. Total damages for the fire were estimated at over $7 million, including the historic Guarantee Building, which suffered smoke and water damage. For those of you unfamiliar, the Guarantee Building is located at 140 Pearl Street. It has those ornate circles on the top of it and windows. It was once known as the Prudential Building, completed in 1896 and designed by the renowned architectural duo of Louis Sullivan and Dankmar Adler, and is celebrated as one of the earliest examples of steel frame skyscraper construction in the United States. It's absolutely beautiful. Hopefully all that rich history will be able to be restored because it is absolutely beautiful. All of the neighboring buildings were evacuated safely, including the Rath Building, Family Court, and Old County Hall. One firefighter was hospitalized for dehydration, but otherwise a near flawless rescue of downtown workers trapped in a building that was on fire. So kudos to everyone involved there. The Belts building is scheduled for demolition later this week because it has become just a fire hazard. So once again, a huge thank you to all of the Buffalo Fire Department, EMTs, and emergency personnel.
Sundown in the Paris of the prairie, weekdays involving treasures buried, and all you wear on the rusty breezes, pushing them round the weather vane, Jesus. Zippo lighter receives the killer's face.
In our next segment, we're going to update the Buffalo Public School abuse allegations from last week. Last week, there was some very disturbing allegations made about the Buffalo Public Schools and crimes against children. Since then, an independent investigation has been initiated, and the Buffalo Board of Education has launched this external investigation into allegations made by Detective Richard High. Richard High accused the BPS officials of obstructing investigations into student sexual abuse and misconduct, and the board has committed to making the findings public now. So the district stance right now, the BPS denied the allegations, labeling them as unfortunate and untrue. And the superintendent, Dr. Tanya Williams-Knight, emphasized that the district's commitment to the student safety, and she stated that the investigation itself is a vigorous response to the claims. Law enforcement's position is that the Erie County District's Attorney Office acknowledged the seriousness of the allegations and affirmed it is dedicating to investigating all and any crimes against children. However, the officials refrained from commenting further on this actual case because they don't want to compromise the ongoing investigations. There's been a lot of community advocacy happening around this event. The organization Bury the Violence, they called for a comprehensive safety reform within the BPS, including the installation of secure entry systems, upgraded surveillance, and enhanced staff training. And a petition to support this was circulating pretty well on btvbuffalo.org. As of right now, no specific timeline has been given for the completion of the external investigations, but we'll be sure here on the I Love Buffalo podcast to check back with this story periodically to hear exactly what's going on, because this could be a sign of rampant corruption of our systems if true, and we for sure want to keep our eye on this story. So we'll check back with this periodically in the future. In our next segment, the Buffalo Bandits are on the cusp of their 5th consecutive National Lacrosse League Finals appearance, following a commanding 9-3 victory over the Vancouver Warriors in Game 1 of the East Conference Finals. The game held at KeyBank Center on Friday, May 2nd, showcased a record-setting defensive performance by goaltender Matt Vink, who made 35 saves, setting a new franchise record for the fewest goals allowed in a playoff game. I'm actually recording this podcast on Sunday, and it releases on Monday. They play tonight, so there's a chance that they've already moved on to the next round by the time this comes out tomorrow. So you may want to check the scores. If not, there will be a Game 3 that comes back to Buffalo next weekend, the upcoming weekend, which we'll cover that in the upcoming events at the end of this episode. Offensively, in the last game, Ian McKay led the charge with 4 goals, while Josh Byrne contributed 5 points with 1 goal and 4 assists, and Dane Smith added 2 goals and an assist. As we've mentioned several times on this podcast, the Bandits have a dynasty literally forming right here in Buffalo. It is the most well-attended lacrosse team in the world in terms of attendance, and they are playing amazing. So get your tickets to the upcoming playoff games. It should be an awesome time. Check them out and go Bandits. In our next segment here, we want to take a minute to thank all of you, the listeners, for tuning into our podcast. And we want to cover some of the previous topics that we did on earlier podcasts, just touch on them so you get a feel for what it's like. We want to strongly suggest that you go back and check out some of the older podcasts, because there were some great topics in there, and these are just a few of them. One of them, we covered Buffalo's Ice Age origins. We covered the prehistoric story of Buffalo's Ice Age landscapes, ancient fossils, and even the Devonian period in a different episode of why there's so many fossils here. We've covered tons of local music artists and played clips of their songs. It's always good to go back and check those out. We'll revisit some artists in the future. In the beginning, we only played like one little clip, and then now we've evolved to playing several clips. So we want to give some of those older bands that we put on here at first more playtime in the future. But go back and check those out. There's a bunch of great bands we've already covered on here. We've covered several different points of Buffalo's history outside of just the prehistoric times. We've also covered the Underground Railroad, the Angola horror train accident, what's going on with Albert the Alligator, one of the most amazing stories you've ever heard in Buffalo sports history, unsolved murders, the growth mindset, tons of stuff about local entrepreneurs, and a super interesting philosophy that is near and dear to my heart called collective intelligence or swarm intelligence, about group problem solving, which is interjected throughout all of the podcasts up to this point. But we strongly suggest going back and checking that out. In our next segment here, we are going to check out Buffalo's history. Did you know that Buffalo was almost the capital of America? This is true. Most people don't know this, but in the early 1800s, there was serious talk about moving the U.S. capital away from Washington, D.C., and Buffalo was one of the cities considered. After the War of 1812, Washington, D.C. had been burned by the British, and many of the lawmakers at the time questioned if it was still secure enough to keep the capital there. Buffalo, thanks to its location on the Great Lakes and the soon-to-be-built Erie Canal, was seen as a gateway to the western frontier and a rising commercial hub, so it was seriously considered and eyed as a place to move the capital. Proposals to relocate the capital were floated around Congress for a little while, but ultimately the momentum faded, and it highlights, though, how Buffalo at the heyday was once seen as a serious contender for national leadership and influence. In its heyday, we were a powerhouse. Just imagine if the White House and Congress and the Smithsonian and all that was on the banks of Lake Erie. Or if the presidential motorcades would roll past Anchor Bar and our downtown and the Buffalo airport. Be a completely different town right now if this was the capital, for sure. So that's always something interesting, something I didn't really know until I found that out this week. In our last segment, we're going to do an outdoors update. First, we're going to start with fishing. I spoke to my good friend and Great Lakes guide, Hans the Carver, a.k.a. Hans Man, and he told me the fishing right now is 4 thumbs up, and he only has 2 thumbs. So that means get out there and go catch some fish. This past week, walleye and northern pike season opened up. So walleye is, of course, hugely popular for food here. It's a great food resource, and they are absolutely delicious. If you like fish fries, walleye is just such a beautiful, light, delicious, flaky fish. The season is open, and the walleye guys are crushing it all on the shore spots, in the harbor, along the beaches, and the break walls. Boats are crushing it too, in often shallow water. And for the walleye, also often at night. People will fish off the break walls at night or wade into the water off the beaches into like 3 feet of water and just cast stick baits and catch walleyes. For pike is always great this time of year after ice out. You can throw jerk baits are some of my favorites. I like neutrally buoyant jerk baits, and I'll cast them almost anywhere you think a pike might live. I personally like to pause my jerk baits a lot, and because I like neutrally buoyant, they'll just sit in the water column, and often when you pick it up after a jerk, there's just a pike on there. Make sure if you're pike fishing, you use steel leaders, and you bring some gear to deal with their sharp teeth, like a glove, long pliers, and wire cutters. You might accidentally hook into a muskie too, so be careful to always handle them. They're out of season right now. It's a wild fishery, so we don't stock this with muskies, so we really respect the fact that this is a wild fishery, and we don't try to harass fish until after they've spawned, especially the muskies, because they're so fragile and low density and low numbers. We want those big females depositing their eggs every year and making it for an awesome, upcoming, fantastic fishery. It already is an amazing fishery, but the more we take care of it, we need to be stewards of it. And so that's why these seasons exist. Right now, bass fishing is also amazing. It's a time of year where you can go out and just knock them dead if you know what you're doing. So for this, you can use tons of different techniques. The fish are staging shallower, getting ready to spawn. It's a great time of year to be in a boat or even fishing from shore. Throwing tubes, jerk baits, spinner baits, all kinds of stuff works. Won't get into too many details, specifics, or specific spots, but giving people ideas of what they could be fishing for right now. These are the types of things that you could be enjoying the outdoors right now. Speaking of enjoying the outdoors, this is also the prime time per year to go birding, looking for birds. Migration is in full swing for the next 3 weeks. You have birds coming through here that are very bright colored. We call it spanky. So they're in their breeding plumage, so they're trying to show off their colors and attract a mate. So when they fly north, they're very colorful. And when they come back in the fall, some of those birds that were colorful are dull. So right now, this 3 weeks is the time where you see warblers and shorebirds and all different kinds of birds in their most brightest plumages. Some nights, they're tracking millions of birds entering into Western New York, especially when there's south or southwest winds. Just tons of migration coming through. So far, it's been pretty good for birding. What you're looking for occasionally is rare birds. That's what people want to see. They want to see birds that aren't normally here. Of course, you need to enjoy the local birds and appreciate all the ones that are here year-round in that nest here. But what you're really looking for this time of year is the birds that are just passing through. So there's a few species that you can only see for like 2 to 3 weeks right now in the spring, and then maybe a few weeks or a few months in the fall as they gently trickle back down south. So these are just the short-term visitors that you're looking for. And so far, we've had a few stragglers and rare birds show up. Nothing super, super rare, but so far we've had several golden wing warblers. Warblers are these little tiny birds that eat insects mostly, and they flutter around the trees. I call them tree ornaments because they look like little ornaments. One's orange and one's blue and one's yellow. They're all just wild colors. They have these high-pitched songs and are usually very colorful for the most part. There's a couple drabber ones, but for the most part, they have a lot of color to them. They're passing through. The golden wing warblers, they actually breed here, but they're just very low population density, and they're known to hybrid with blue wing warblers that tend to thin their numbers a lot. So finding a wild golden wing warbler in our area is always exciting. And a few of those have turned up so far. We also had the largest flock of avocets that was ever found in Erie County show up at one of the beaches that my buddy Kevin Rybczynski found. Kevin Rybczynski is an interesting guy. You can follow him on Instagram. He has the handle just Buffalo, New York, which is pretty awesome. And he's very active on Instagram, posting all different kinds of great things about Buffalo. We often share it on our social media for the podcast as well. And he was lucky enough to find these avocets. And he also found a willet with that group. There were several willets found this week. They are normally found on the West Coast and some of the beach areas on the East Coast. Same thing with the avocets. These are like larger shorebirds that kind of walk on beaches. The willets are drab. They're just drab gray, but when they fly, they have this bright black and white zebra pattern almost to them when they're flying. And it's really contrasting when they fly along the beaches. One of the most interesting sightings this year so far has been the influx of white-eyed vireos. So white-eyed vireos, they're a migratory songbird that usually stops their migration around Pennsylvania. They don't come this far north. But recently there's been a slew of them showing up all over this range. And it's hard to say either they're trying to expand their range or they just had a day or two where south winds pushed them past their breeding grounds and they overshot them and now they need to make their way back. But there's definitely been a large uptick of those. You don't see those every year. They're really cool looking birds, like bright neon yellow and blue, and they have this bright white eye and a real cool song. Before I got into birding, I didn't realize the variety that existed here and how fun and just gives you something to do when you're outside. I like to be outside for any kind of reason, and I like to be on a quest or be an explorer, and you get to explore all the bird species, or you can do this with butterflies, you can do it with plants, you can do it with insects. I do it with fishing. You're looking for the rare things, the biggest fish or the rarest bird or things like this. Just adds an element of fun to the exploration process of checking out our universe here, right here in Buffalo, New York. All right, in closing here, we're going to sign off with a bunch of our upcoming events that are happening around town this week, right here in Buffalo, New York. First of all, at Buffalo Riverworks on the 6th, we have Eminem Presents Magdalena Bay Imaginal Mystery Tour. Got Roller Derby at 7 o'clock on the 8th. And Ganja White Night Sprouted Tour is on the 9th and 10th at 7 o'clock. At Larkin at Exchange Building on 5/6 at 10 a.m., we have the Spring Artisan Market. That should be awesome. At the Kaz on 5/7, we have We're Not Dead Yet, a tribute to the Grateful Dead. On the 9th at Babeville at 8 o'clock, we have the Blues Brothers Review Comedy Show at Asbury Hall. Elmwood Village Farmers Market starts its season on 5/10 at 8 a.m. and runs through the end of November. So that's awesome. The Richardson Hotel on 5/10 at 11 a.m. also has Buffalo Mother's Day Market. West Falls Center for the Arts on the 10th at 7 o'clock has Songs and Stars of the Grand Ole Opry. And on Sunday, 5/11, is Mother's Day local restaurants hosting brunch, including the Curtis Hotel, Buffalo Riverworks, Alchemy Wine and Beer in Hamburg, Pearl Street, Southern Tier Brewing. There's just so many to list. So many awesome brunches happening around town. Look those up for Mother's Day. Don't forget about your mom this Sunday. Thank you to all the beautiful moms out there, including and especially mine. Thanks, Mom. Happy Mother's Day. I love you very much. Buffalo, let's remember that a rising tide raises all ships. Get your kids into jiu-jitsu and stop by the Buffalo Open Coffee Club at 7:30 a.m. in the Seneca One Tower, open to everyone. It's business people and founders and people looking to make connections and build high-trust relationships. That is every Tuesday morning, 7 a.m. inside the Seneca One Tower. We're going to leave you this week with a clip about vulnerability and courage by author Brené Brown. Vulnerability leads to growth, and vulnerability always requires courage. I highly recommend her book, The Power of Vulnerability. Here's Brené. Have a great week, good neighbors.
How many of you, honestly, when you're thinking about doing something vulnerable or saying something vulnerable, think, God, vulnerability is weakness. This is weakness. How many of you think of vulnerability and weakness synonymously? The majority of people. Now, let me ask you this question. This past week at TED, how many of you, when you saw vulnerability up here, thought it was pure courage? Vulnerability is not weakness. I define vulnerability as emotional risk, exposure, uncertainty. It fuels our daily lives. And I've come to the belief, this is my 12th year doing this research, that vulnerability is our most accurate measurement of courage. To be vulnerable, to let ourselves be seen, to be honest,